Hello, and a very warm welcome to all those that have tuned in to the second episode of our On the Pulse series. My name is Talya Shalev, and I am a business account manager here at WRAP. And I'm very excited to be joined by Helen Bird, WRAP's strategic engagement manager, to discuss the guidance we published around considerations for compostable plastic packaging back in February 2020. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Talya. Hi, everyone.
So today, Helen is going to be talking us through some of the key elements of the guidance, including what treatment options are currently available for compostable materials, where compostable materials for packaging is most appropriate, and what the future for compostable materials looks like with regards to packaging and the UK Plastics Pact. So firstly, Helen, could you explain to us what WRAP's current position is on compostable plastics?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I think to start with, it is in the targets. Two of the targets are very much linked with compostables. So that's the second target of 100% of plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and the third target for 70% of plastic packaging to be effectively recycled or composted. Now, I think it's fair to say that in the grand scheme of where we see all packaging, we do think that there is absolutely a role for compostable packaging, but it's likely to be a minority of the total amount of plastic packaging, and possibly in niche areas in particular sectors. So I think we'll probably come on to that a little bit more in detail as we go through. But I think a really key part of this as well is that in the same way we have a criteria for what we define as being recyclable, that also applies to compostables. So in order for something to be deemed compostable or recyclable, it must be in practice and at scale. And at the moment with compostables, there are a number of challenges that we need to overcome in order to ensure that it is practical and happens at that scale.
Okay. And do you think that, or do you find that our position on compostables differs from our position on biodegradable materials?
Yeah, so there's lots of different terms in this space, and it can be a bit of a minefield. In the guidance, we do our best to sort of distinguish these different terms. But I think that there are the different terms that tend to fly around are bio-based, and that means that it's based on a biomaterial as opposed to a fossil fueled derived material. And biodegradable is different to compostables. So in order for something to be compostable, it has to meet the standard for compostables, and which means that there are particular situation where it would actually break down, which tends normally to be around industrial processing, but sometimes you can get home composting. The tricky thing with the term biodegradable is in its own right, it doesn't really mean anything because there are no specific circumstances for that material to break down. So I think a key thing for people to remember is that all compostable plastics are biodegradable, but actually not all biodegradable plastics are compostable. And that's why we use the term compostable very specifically within the Plastics Pact targets.
And have you found, or from my experience, there's a misunderstanding around the term compostable and bio-based materials. Can compostable plastics, are they all bio-based, or are they different from bio-based materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for the majority, the answer is that most compostables are also bio-based. But as you can see in this diagram, which is also within the guidance, that isn't always the case. So you can have fossil-derived plastics which are non-bio-based and vice versa. So yeah, so it's lots of complexity.
So you've just started to explain to us how compostables can break down depending on what they're made from. Could you explain to us in a bit more detail about how compostable materials are collected and treated / processed, and if there are any problems around that infrastructure at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the answer to the question really depends on where that material arises. So, so collections that happen, for example, in the hospitality industry will be different to the collections that we have when we're at home. And the key thing to remember is that in order for something to be composted, it has to get to the right facility, and that facility has to be able to be equipped with to be able to process the material. And herein lies some of the challenges. So this diagram here, which you can is one of the diagrams from the guidance document, kind of illustrates the different options for organic treatment here in the UK. So so a lot of organic material, particularly the stuff that's collected from your homes as garden waste, might go through something called an in-vessel composting. Now, this is the absolutely perfect treatment process to actually compost compostable plastics. But a lot of our garden waste also goes through something called open air windrow. And although it's technically possible for some of these materials to be composted, there are particular regulations around open air windrow which prohibits animal byproducts going through that process. So it's very, very tricky if the material goes in that direction. Now, the other option is through anaerobic digestion. And if you're one of the 50% roughly of householders who have access to a food waste collection, then a lot of your food waste will go through an anaerobic digestion process. Now, this would seem to be probably one of the best ways for compostable plastics to go in the future. But at the moment in anaerobic digestion, actually all types of packaging are removed at the very front end of the AD process. And the other problem is that that because compostables require oxygen to break down, an anaerobic digestion is an air-free environment, and therefore they actually don't completely compost through that process. So it is tricky. And one of the other tricky things is that as a householder, you will have no control and quite likely no knowledge over whether or not your garden waste will go through an in-vessel compost, or your food waste could also go through in-vessel composting. Your garden waste could go through in-vessel or open air windrow. Your food waste could also go through anaerobic digestion. So there are a number of different challenges. But the other thing that we need to remember is that for the organic sector, one of their biggest challenges is actually the contamination of their product, either the digestate or the compost, is the contamination of conventional plastics. And it's for that reason that, you know, for example, in vessel composting, that if any sort of packaging is seen, they will be desperately trying to remove as much of it as they possibly can in order to meet the standards for the products that they go on to produce. So yeah, so there are a lot of challenges at the moment.
So when we're talking to our members who are looking at moving into recyclable, reusable or compostable materials, but we're aware of these issues and challenges in terms of the treatment of compostable materials, what would you recommend our members in terms of the materials, the products that they have? Are there any particular products that they can be that can move into compostable plastics and safely be composted at the other end?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think through the development of the guidance and in consultation with the organics producers themselves as well, is we started to look at areas where we think it might make the most sense. So, so an example is food caddy liners. Now, I know that strictly speaking, that's not packaging, but if you're recycling food waste at home and your food waste will go into one of these processes, the removal of the depackaging in anaerobic digestion it's not 100% successful. So actually you still end up with conventional plastics contaminating the digestate, which is absolutely what we really need to avoid, because obviously that will lead to microplastics. So actually having compostable food caddy liners would make sense. And likewise, things like fruit and vegetable stickers. So in the case here, we've got a banana. How many people would actually remove the sticker before they recycle the banana skin? And we really want that banana skin because we absolutely don't want that rotting in landfill. We want that to go into that AD facility. We don't want to be putting conventional plastics into that facility knowing that they will never break down. So tea bags, fruit and veg stickers, coffee pods is quite an interesting area, because we think that, if you've got the coffee that remains within the pod, then it would be great to be able to recycle the coffee as well as the pod. Remember, we've always got to keep it really, really simple as you possibly can for citizens, so they could just recycle the whole thing. Another area to think about is where packaging is going to be heavily food contaminated, and it's an opportunity to recycle the food along with potentially the packaging. So if you've got something that's really heavily baked onto the packaging and would be really difficult to recycle, then perhaps that would be a good opportunity. Closed loop situations. So I mentioned before that the treatment the treatment for the packaging will really depend on the situation. So an example could be within the hospitality sector. If you're able to control all of the materials that go into the different receptacles, the different waste and recycling and food waste, then there's an opportunity to be able to collect those for composting, because you can then also know that you're sending it to exactly the right type of facility that will enable that to be actually composted. And I think the other overarching thing to say is that, where compostables could also offer an opportunity are where it's not possible at the moment to recycle, or it's going to be very challenging to recycle things. So things like flexible packaging that's heavily food contaminated would be a great opportunity for compostables, because some of the challenges around mechanically recycling heavily contaminated film might outweigh the benefits of potentially composting. So and I think sort of the other thing though to sort of just bear in mind with all of this is, well, where might you not ever want to use a compostable plastic? And I think really that does come back to what the situation is at the moment. So if you take a plastic bottle, we recycle lots of plastic bottles here in the UK. We're definitely moving in the right direction on that. What you absolutely don't want compostables is for them to end up in the recycling where they could contaminate that really good high quality material. So while it's, as it says here, it's technically possible to recycle some of these materials like PLA, polylactic acid type materials. It would be very, very challenging economically to separate those from recycling from other polymers like PET, HDPE, polypropylene. So that's a really big concern for recyclers. So that's where you would definitely not want to have a compostable. We're often asked about compostables as a sort of a secondary element of packaging. So for example, if you had a paper cup which you then lined with a compostable material, I mean, I think what we need to remember is that for the paper recycling industry, what they want is paper. And so the really important thing for them to be able to do is to make sure that you can separate the fibres from any other element of the packaging. And then all of that material will go off for energy recovery. It won't be either recycled or composted I mean, I think with cartons, I should correct myself there, there's some great work going on, for example, by ACE UK, who try and recycle the plastic and the aluminium element that comes off cartons. But in the majority of cases, it actually doesn't matter if it's compostable or not.
Okay, so that's a lot to think about in terms of when our members are trying to decide which materials to move into or not. But very well explained, thank you.
Well, to help, well, actually, well, to help them with that, within the guidance, we've put in some decision-making trees to try and navigate all of this, because it is an absolute minefield. So there's sort of different categories in the hierarchy, so you can beeline to it depending on the nature of your business, and it will take you through a series of questions that I've just illustrated here. I've selected sort of a few randoms for people to see, but you can go through this. It's an interactive document, and I think another point to remember with all of this is that in the first instance, if we possibly can, what we should be doing is trying to not use packaging if it's not absolutely necessary. So, you know, can things be designed for reuse? Are they needed at all? And then you can follow it through to help identify whether or not it's a potential for your business.
That's great. That's a really well thought out part of the document that would be very useful, I think, for a lot of our members, so definitely worth checking out. So what you're describing, or what you've been describing in so far, is what is currently available in the UK in terms of the infrastructure around collections and treatments for compostable materials. Do you see that changing in the next 3 to 5 years? And is there any sort of insight that we have for our members in terms of when they're looking to introduce compostable materials into their portfolios?
Sure. So one thing I should add to the previous is that we're in the process of collecting data from local authorities in terms of what percentage of local authorities are actually accepting compostable plastics in garden waste collections, food waste collections, or both. And when we've got that information and any further evidence, we will be updating the compostable guidance. But in terms of the future direction, I think the key thing that's going to unlock the barriers is so the major policy changes which are set to come in 2023, 2024, relating to extended producer responsibility. Now we have a roadmap document which is on the UK Plastics Pact website pages, which we very recently updated, which sort of outlines a couple of key things to think about here. Now the timing of 2023 links in with those key policy changes, and compostable plastic packaging will form part of extended producer responsibility going forward. Actually, it does at the moment in the regulations, and arguably the compostable sector are it's a bit unfair for them at the moment because they pay into the system, but actually their packaging is not, they can't get PRNs, packaging recovery notes, issued for stuff that is composted. So that is going to need to change going forward. And what we've outlined here in terms of activities that we strongly think will happen is that for policies like funds from things like extended producer responsibility are targeted where infrastructure is needed. So, for example, if in anaerobic digestion, we think that is going to be the way forward for compostables in terms of their treatment, a second stage will be needed at the back of those processes to ensure that the material is actually composted. And EPR could lend itself to funding that, because otherwise, where does the money come from? And the other thing in terms of the outcomes, very much links to that. So we need to get really clear in terms of exactly what is the disposal route for these different types of packaging, and linking that very much strongly with the labelling for recycling as well.
Okay, that's a lot for our members to think about, which is great. For right now, given the challenges that we're facing currently around labelling and clarifying the message around plastics, what should we be saying to our citizens about compostable packaging and sharing that message more clearly?
Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult because of the issues with the existing infrastructure. But what we have done is we've looked at different types of packaging to look at, well, what do we think is a good message for citizens that avoids greenwash, and what are the things that perhaps we should avoid as statements, which is also something that is outlined in the guidance. So, for example, statements that you could put on your packaging is that it's certified for industrial composting. So you could put it in your food and garden waste if your local council accept it, and then people would be able to check with their local authority. We talked about contamination of conventional plastics before, which we really have to avoid. So some really clear statements around not putting it in into the recycling bin. Another area around compostables and the term biodegradable, which is often used to citizens. I mean, we actually think that you should avoid the term biodegradable if you possibly can, because it doesn't actually mean anything, and move into the compostable. But you know, people shouldn't think that it's okay to litter these items, that they will just magically disappear. They don't. You know, there's no evidence around how long these things will take to degrade, but you know, it's going to be a very long time. So it should never be an excuse for littering. At the very beginning, I think I mentioned there's different standards for different types of compostables. So you can have a packaging that's certified for industrial composting, and then you can also have certification for home composting. Now, if you put something in your home composting that is certified for industrial composting, then you will probably be very disappointed to find it in your home compost many months later. So that could be things that could be communication messages to people around that as well, depending on the certification that you have for your packaging.
Thank you. This has been really helpful, really insightful. I think for all of our members, there is the guidance. It is available on our website. And if you would like any more clarification in terms of moving into compostable materials and what that means for your packaging portfolio, then you should get in touch with either your account manager or the technical team here at WRAP. But thank you so much for your time today in explaining all of this for us, Helen. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add for our members in terms of looking at compostables in their portfolios?
Well, the only other thing that sort of dawns on me is Clear on Plastics, which is the citizen-facing campaign for WRAP as well as Recycle Now, of course. And you know, we know from our research that citizens think that compostable or biodegradable plastics are a silver bullet solution. Now, we all know that that's not the case. But the Clear on Plastics website provides some answers to all of this to citizens in some quite manageable bite-sized chunks. So that might also be another useful reference point for members.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Helen. And thank you to everyone for tuning in for episode 2 of On the Pulse, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take care.
Thanks.